This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The World Health Organization warns of an accelerating pandemic in Africa. The ICC welcomes the arrest of Darfur militia leader Ali Kushaib. And UNESCO raises the alarm about the threat the coronavirus pandemic poses to museums worldwide. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Ramanyang with a preview of your business news.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. We'll explore why Zimbabwe's president is accusing businesses in the country of unfairly inflating prices. And as Africa's multi-billion-dollar tourism industry grinds to a halt, we'll explore what the exit options may be. The details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, in our top story, the World Health Organization has said the COVID-19 pandemic is accelerating in Africa. Data from the Africa CDC shows the continent has nearly 210,000 recorded cases, with 10 countries accounting for 75% of those cases. South Africa dominates with a quarter of the continent's infections. The WHO Regional Africa Director has emphasized the need for Africa to receive supplies like personal protective equipment and testing kits.
One of the biggest challenges we face in the response continues to be the availability of supplies, particularly test kits, and this is due to disruptions in the global supply chain. The UN has established a supply chain task force, and other mechanisms are in place to address these shortages, including work done by the African Union. And more than 8 million diagnostic supplies and 200 million items of personal protective equipment are in the pipeline to be shipped to African countries.
There are concerns that quarantine centers for returning Zimbabweans could lead to an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. This follows a surge in cases there in recent weeks. Some people have complained about delays in testing and poor conditions at facilities from where several hundred returnees have escaped. CGTN's Farai Makutoya has the details.
Rabison Ziso, who jetted back to Zimbabwe from the United Kingdom on the 1st of June, was only released from quarantine after a 10-day stay at one of the holding facilities. He thought he'd be going home much earlier after paying for a private COVID-19 test.
We were told that the results were to come between 4 hours and 24, but this did not happen. We had to chase for our results. On the 10th day, we had to chase for our results. It was pathetic. Having paid $70 is a lot of money.
The government has acknowledged that it's facing some challenges in running the quarantine centers.
People cannot be discharged without undergoing PCR test. And this is where all the noises are coming from. We don't have adequate testing equipment. We had a situation yesterday at Roosevelt Girls High where people, instead of the 8 days, have been in quarantine for more than 20 days.
The government has received enough testing kits to cater for the 2,600 returnees currently housed at 60 schools and colleges as well as hotels. But that will only solve one problem. Quarantine centers have become a hotbed of new infections, and it is feared that cross-contamination could see a further increase in COVID-19 cases.
So we prefer a situation where our retainees are using separate individual rooms and minimize contact between the retainees. And this we try by all means to make sure we do, but in some cases we have run short of facilities. It can then be a concern, and this is an issue that we are also looking at. If there is cross-infection.
Those who test positive are sent to separate isolation facilities, while everyone else can go home on the 8th day of their stay.
We are insisting that when people leave our quarantine stations, they are given a certificate of fitness if they are negative. And when people arrive in their various communities, community leaders, traditional leaders are insisting on the production of these certificates. We are not trying to stigmatize, but to make sure that every returning resident to this country goes through the necessary procedures.
Security at the quarantine facilities has also been stepped up to ensure those living there do not escape before they are officially released. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Uganda has sealed off one of its prisons in the eastern part of the country after a prisoner tested positive for COVID-19. The inmate has been placed in isolation as authorities try to prevent an outbreak. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria reports.
Over 200 inmates and staff of Kaiti prison in eastern Uganda have been placed in quarantine after a COVID-19 case was discovered. The spokesperson for Uganda's prison says the inmate has been taken to a health facility for treatment.
We're expecting Minister of Health today to take samples, random samples, and then see the results. If they are all safe, or if there is any problem, still it will be very well handled.
The country has now opened 2 isolation centers for new prisoners to avoid congestion in the existing facilities. Prison authorities say the measure is to contain transmission in detention centers as many of the cells are already full to capacity. Some inmates have also been moved to other less congested jails to free up space. Uganda already released about 800 prisoners across the country as a measure to reduce crowding at prisons during COVID-19. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Government officials in one province in South Africa are calling for the reintroduction of an alcohol ban that was recently lifted due to a spike in crime levels. More cases of crime, including murder, have been reported in both the Eastern and Western Cape provinces since the resumption of the sale of alcohol. CGTN's Travis Andrews has the details.
It's been like this ever since the prohibition of alcohol was lifted. A long line of customers queuing outside liquor stores throughout the Western Cape. Many have been stocking up on alcohol out of fear that a new ban could be in the pipeline. But the Western Cape government, though, is taking a different approach to its Eastern Cape counterpart.
We must be very careful and get the balance right, in my opinion. We mustn't, at any point, kind of close down the economy completely. But we have seen, if we manage and police the alcohol sales carefully, and that includes distribution of alcohol into our townships over weekends, if we manage and control and police that properly, we can bring down the number of alcohol-related murders, etc.
Statistics show most murders are occurring from Monday to Thursday when alcohol sales are allowed, and the informal townships have become hotspots. Since lockdown regulation 3 kicked in, the strong visual policing presence of roadblocks has been removed and restrictions of movement has been relaxed.
I'm just really worried about going to a police state. We have a constitution in this country, and we still need to adhere to those clauses in the constitution that speaks to very basic and fundamental rights of all citizens. And I think one must always just respect that and remember that. And we need to work out. The issue is not necessarily blocking everything, of closing and banning. The issue is us managing it, policing it properly, so that we can solve the problem.
For now, the local alcohol industry isn't bracing for a new ban just yet, but that's not stopping concerned consumers of waiting for hours each day to purchase their favorite tipple. While hospitals such as this are filling up with patients admitted for alcohol-related incidents, some even requiring beds earmarked for COVID-19 patients, the Western Cape government still believes it has a tightrope to walk, and that urging responsible drinking instead of prohibition is the correct way forward. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Meanwhile, here in Kenya, the country's Ministry of Health has received medical supplies worth over $700,000 from China. These supplies are a donation from the Department of Commerce of Hunan Province in China, along with the Hunan Road and Bridge Construction Group and the Kenya Chinese Chamber of Commerce. The donation will go towards Kenya's efforts to battle the coronavirus, whose cases have been rising each day. Top officials from various ministries involved in combating the viral outbreak have thanked China and Chinese companies for the donation.
In fact, at this point, this is when our demand is really growing. So the support could not have come at a better time. We thank all the friends that have stood with us. And today, the company that represents the Chinese people, we are grateful for what has been provided.
We are also very happy that we have contributed to Kenyan government's efforts to combat the pandemic. The process involved in purchasing the supplies was stringent. It takes at least 60 days for this batch to arrive here in Nairobi.
Both the government and the private sector, including our overseas Chinese communities, have made a lot of donations to Kenya. It illustrates that China and Kenya governments and their respective private sectors have come together in the fight against the pandemic.
The Chinese government's recent release of a white paper on actions against the coronavirus pandemic continues to receive positive reviews. The paper records China's efforts and achievements in the fight against COVID-19. It also outlines China's future plans to eradicate the disease globally. The executive director of the Afri-China Media Center in Nigeria, Ikenna Emeu, says China has been at the forefront in the fight against the coronavirus in Africa. According to Emeu, China's efforts reflect its life-first policy.
President Xi Jinping's policy of human lives first. Human lives matter much more than economy. So China threw in everything into that battle to make sure that lives are safe, human beings are preserved. I commend China for extending its goodwill to Africa. It sent over 148 medical officials and experts to 11 African countries, not to talk of the medical supplies from the government, from individuals. China did something commendable, and I really commend the country for such efforts.
Well, China has also donated medical supplies to South Sudan to help the country curb the spread of the coronavirus. The donation arrived in the capital Juba on Thursday. It is the fourth batch of medical supplies Beijing has donated to the country since the outbreak of COVID-19. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more.
The donation includes protective clothes, face masks, surgical masks and surgical gloves. Beijing says it will continue to support South Sudan's hospitals. South Sudan's task force on COVID-19 has reported an increase in the number of people infected with the coronavirus. The country has one of the most underdeveloped health sectors in the world.
This is the latest action which demonstrates Chinese government and the Chinese people's commitment to support African countries' effort in containing the COVID-19.
South Sudan has only recorded a few deaths from COVID-19. The government attributes that to the assistance it is receiving from international donors, including China.
It is not the first time that the people of China has been standing with the people of South Sudan. You have been with us in all difficulties. China has never turned its eyes.
But it is now the rainy season in South Sudan, and the government says waterborne diseases are becoming common and malaria cases are also rising. China says it is committing $2 billion to help economies of developing countries recover from the disruptions caused by the coronavirus pandemic. But South Sudan's government says it still needs more support to keep people healthy. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
To Egypt now, where the country is restarting its tourism industry next month. Some international flights will resume and foreign tourists will be allowed to visit areas least affected by the virus. That includes the southern Sinai and the Red Sea province. The pandemic shut down the country's critical tourism industry, which accounts for 5% of its GDP. Egypt has reported more than 38,000 coronavirus cases and 1,300 deaths. Time for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, China says it's willing to increase cooperation with Germany in the fight against COVID-19. And the ICC welcomes the arrest of Darfur militia leader Ali Khashab.
The volcanic island of Reunion, rising over 300 meters from the ocean, is a hiker's paradise. Patrice Zulm is a local hiking guide who accompanies clients to remote parts of the island. His destinations include the Mafat volcanic circle, named after a leader of the so-called Moron, or escaped slaves. Reunion is increasingly threatened by overdevelopment, increased tourism, and overpopulation. Patrice is passionate about preserving the natural heritage of the island and strives to share the importance of this with others.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Premier Li Keqiang says China is willing to increase cooperation with Germany in the fight against COVID-19. He made the comment in a video call with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Li said China and Germany should join hands to safeguard multilateralism and create more opportunities for enterprises to resume economic production. The Chinese premier also called on Germany to play a bigger role in bringing China and Europe closer together after taking over the presidency of the European Union. He also expressed hope that negotiations for a China-Europe investment deal could be concluded as soon as possible. Merkel, for her part, pledged to work towards closer ties between China and Europe. The two sides also signed deals in the automobile industry as well as the energy sector, among others. Well, the coronavirus pandemic has put a strain on relations between Beijing and Washington. A former senior finance official says both sides need to return to the negotiating table.
China and the United States should keep timely communication on major issues. The scope of such communication should return to normal and be consistent with the status of both countries as two major economies. Talks should resume not only on trade, but also on various areas of concern.
Zhu Gonghao added that both sides share a long history of close economic relations and that the this serves the best interests of the people of both nations. As China's economy recovers from the pandemic, officials say they expect a sharp rebound in the third quarter of the year. Now, the U.S. top infectious disease experts say the government will fund and conduct studies on 3 experimental coronavirus vaccines. Last-stage trials are expected to begin in July, August and September, respectively. They will involve tens of thousands of people to assess the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. Currently, about 10 coronavirus vaccines have reached trials in human trials. Experts say a safe and effective one could take 12 to 18 months to develop. The International Criminal Court in The Hague has welcomed the arrest of former Sudanese militia leader Ali Khashab. Khashab, who has been on the court's wanted list since 2007, is accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity allegedly committed between 2003 and 2004 in Darfur. Robert Nagila has more.
accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The former Darfur militia leader, Ali Kushiab, is said to have surrendered himself voluntarily in the northern town of Birao in the Central African Republic. According to the International Criminal Court, he was flown to the Netherlands on Tuesday. ICC Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda described the arrest as a pivotal moment.
I hope that the suspect's transfer to the court also sends a clear and unequivocal message that no matter how long it takes or the obstacles placed in our path, my office will not stop until the alleged perpetrators of Rome Statute crimes are brought to justice.
Kushiab, a commander of the pro-government Popular Defense Forces, is accused of leading attacks on towns and villages during the Darfur conflict that killed hundreds of thousands of people and drove more than 2 million from their homes. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Kushiab in 2007, accusing him of murder, rape and pillage in the Western Sudanese region of Darfur between 2003 and 2004.
I remain hopeful that a new chapter of constructive ICC Sudan engagement, rooted in mutual respect and a genuine commitment to bringing justice for the victims of heinous crimes committed in Darfur, may be on the horizon.
Kushiab is one of 6 men wanted by the ICC for crimes in Darfur. The list of suspects includes former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted by the military in 2019 after months of protests against his rule. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Bashir in 2008, accusing him of war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to 2 years in detention by a court in Sudan in December last year. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The United Nations mission in South Sudan has launched a 5-day mobile COVID-19 awareness campaign. The initiative uses 3-wheel vehicles to sensitize the public in the foremost densely populated towns in Western Equatoria. CGTN's Astatal has those details.
These tricycles are driving through major streets, broadcasting messages on COVID-19 preventative measures. The launch is part of the United Nations missions in South Sudan's ongoing endeavors to support the national-led COVID-19 response in the country.
It is the only way to keep you and your family safe.
Some people are still living in Wonderland. They do not want to believe that this thing is real. But we need to continue the efforts to educate the general populace, to get them to appreciate the fact that COVID-19 is real and that we need to observe the protocols to be able to stay safe.
Others who have it, if they cough or breathe.
The head of South Sudan's COVID-19 task force in Gubedu, Wilson Thomas Yanga, is also supporting the mobile awareness drive. Yanga is urging every South Sudanese citizen to be wary of the dangers of this pandemic.
It is the responsibility of everybody to let people know that Corona is real, and the Corona is on the ground. In the specific in Yambio, we have a case, and we need to know about that. People need to know about that. Although many people have gone outside there from door to door, telling people about the danger of Corona, to the best of my knowledge, people are not adhering to. So we need to put maximum effort to see that the information reaches people in the village and everywhere that the Corona is a dangerous disease that has no cure, it has no vaccination. The only vaccination and the only cure is prevention.
Despite the worldwide health and safety risks posed by the virus, adhering to preventative measures, especially physically distancing, still remains a concern among South Sudanese communities. The mobile awareness campaign will run with the intention of sensitizing the public on the importance of adhering to the preventative measures. Astatal, CGTN.
Your business news up next with Raman Young.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business news. We'll explore why Zimbabwe's president is turning the heat on businesses, accusing them of inflating prices. And as Africa's multi-billion-dollar tourism sector grinds to a halt, we'll examine the exit options.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
He was called on to do a job, launch the Safaricom brand in Kenya, make it successful. But for founding CEO Michael Joseph, success was not enough. Significance was the goal.
Other than making money for your shareholders, should be to change people's lives for the better.
Valued at over $11 billion and arguably the most profitable company in East Africa, the question is, has Michael Joseph's vision and the way he'd envisioned it come to pass? And what lies ahead for the man and the company he started?
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Let's start in Zimbabwe. The country's president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has accused businesses in the country of undermining the local currency by constantly raising prices. Now, he claims the currency strain we're seeing over there is part of a wider political plot, he claims, against his government. Economic analysts, however, disagree and are pointing straight to the fundamentals. They say that the government's budget is under a fair bit of pressure from spending designed to combat the pandemic. The current economic pressure may in fact force authorities to resort to printing more money, and that in turn may stoke inflation even further. A year after Zimbabwe ended a decade of dollarization and reintroduced the Zimbabwean dollar, the local currency has fallen hard on the black market, and that has fueled price increases and it's pushed headline inflation rates well over 700%. On to East Africa, Rwanda's revenue collection is forecast to fall to just $1.5 billion in the fiscal year starting in July. That's roughly 6% lower than the $1.6 billion revenue target for the current fiscal year. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, is a key reason for this decline, as economic activity in the travel, hospitality, entertainment and tourism sectors essentially ground to a halt. Supply chains that support exports in mining, agribusiness and textiles are also disrupted. Non-tax revenue is also expected to decline to just under $200 million in the 2020-2021 fiscal year. The Finance Minister, Uziela Ndagijimana, told Parliament that the proposed $3.4 billion budget for the next fiscal year will have to be partially funded by grants worth just over $520 million and external loans of over $800 million. Now, with borders closed and airlines grounded due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa's multi-billion-dollar tourism sector is quite literally coming apart. From Kenya's Masai Mara to the Okavango Delta in Botswana, rural communities that do depend on foreign and domestic tourism spending for their income are hurting badly. Conservation projects have not been spared either. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro examining the grim future for game parks, lodges and travel agencies, even as some countries gradually start to ease restrictions.
Hundreds of thousands depend on the tourism sector in Africa. In addition, the slump in tourist dollars has hit conservation projects hard. And even as countries around the world ease lockdown measures, game parks, lodges and travel agencies face a grim future.
We've made
very few purchases of vehicles, and the most recent one was only a month before Corona struck, and in which therefore means that we are now sitting with vehicles that we're struggling to repay to the finances, and so things are very, very challenging right now because all business is gone right now.
According to an estimate by Safari Bookings, the safari industry generates some $12.4 billion in annual revenue for South Africa, Botswana, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda and Zambia, Africa's top wildlife tourist destinations. Over 300 tour operators were contacted by the online safari travel platform, and almost 93% reported a drop in bookings by at least 75% due to the pandemic.
It's been tough, and the toughest thing is the staff, because we've had to let the staff go. We paid them for the first month. Second month we paid a limited portion because TERS was kicking in, and yeah, we just riding it out now. But it's not an indefinite thing. We don't know how long we can do this for.
A survey of close to 500 businesses in the Kruger-Lowveld district, South Africa's Safari Heartland, conducted by the local tourism agency last month, found that 90% of the operators believed they would not survive even if international borders opened immediately. Over 2/3 of them have laid off employees.
We save some of our money in the banks, but we just run out of money in the bank. So we'll start starving for now.
Beyond the human cost, conservationists worry that growing desperation in local communities hit by COVID-19 could fuel a wave of poaching. 3 popular game parks in South Africa recently dehorned dozens of rhinos as a preventative measure against poaching. South African Tourism Minister warned Parliament last month that up to 600,000 jobs were at risk if the sector remained shut until September. And the government's relief initiatives like the South Africa's offer of $3,000 one-time grants to small tourism businesses will do little to staunch the losses. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Let's drill down to one specific country, Tanzania. Its hotel and travel industry has been hit quite hard by this pandemic as international travel evaporated virtually overnight. But some industry players are showing tentative signs of recovery after the government over there allowed the resumption of flights into and out of Tanzania. One of the country's first 5-star hotels, the Hyatt Regency, was closed since early April, but now it's back and open for business. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has the details.
The Hyatt Kilimanjaro is one of the most popular hotels in Tanzania. Known as the Kili, this legendary hotel has been a landmark in Dar es Salaam since the mid-1960s. Despite its rich history, it too was not immune to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. But after more than 2 months of being closed, it has been reopened for business. The regional commissioner, Paul Makonda, says COVID-19 is no longer something to stop businesses from operating.
There's no need to fear. Businessmen should do their business, bars should be open, those who own bands should play music, even clubs. As long as they stay socially distant, they wear masks and sanitize, they are free to do business.
After suspending all international flights as one of the measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus 2 months ago, Tanzania is now encouraging foreign tourists and business visitors to fly into the country. The Kilimanjaro's management says the nature of business has changed, but they've adapted accordingly.
We are able to do or to continue the business because all what we need to do is to maintain the social distancing, wearing the mask and all other protective details that we should take.
The tourism sector contributes $2 billion to the country annually, accounting for 25% of all exchange earnings. Downtown Dar es Salaam is home to over 100 hotels, but not all of them are open for business. Overlooking Dar es Salaam Harbour and the Indian Ocean, this strip is a hotbed for the country's biggest hotels, but it's also a contrast of business approach. While the Hyatt Kilimanjaro has reopened, Johari Rotana just down the road remains closed. So as it opens its doors, Hyatt is hoping that its decision will be rewarding. Over the last 2 weeks, hotels, restaurants and tour operators have been getting certified under new strict health measures set out by the government. The Tourism Ministry has come up with Standard of Operations, or SOPs, aimed at the promotion of the country's tourism industry in the COVID-19 outbreak. Some measures include digitizing menus as a way to reduce unnecessary surface contact.
We have introduced a new menu, an online menu, from which you can scan through the QR codes, then you can get it through your phone. Then through there you can go through all the menu and you can order whatever you want.
The government of Tanzania is still asking tourists and locals to frequently wash hands, use face masks and practice social distancing, and to report any symptoms if they arise. But it's hoped that as the Kilimanjaro opens its doors, others can follow suit as a way to save the sector. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Briefly away from our borders now, the European Union hopes to reopen its borders to foreigners in July as leaders across the bloc loosen stringent lockdowns that have caused a steep downturn in economic activity. The 27 EU member states have the final say on who they will let in, but Brussels is suggesting a gradual and partial reopening of borders to travellers outside the bloc from the 1st of July. Greece, for example, depends fairly heavily on tourism. Authorities there have already announced that they will reopen from next week Monday to a list of countries that includes Australia, China and South Korea. German nationals will be free to visit other EU member states from Monday, but the country has decided to extend its warning against travel outside the bloc until the end of August. And finally, back here in the continent, hairdressers in South Africa are now offering door-to-door services despite the nationwide restrictions and movement which were designed to stem the spread of COVID-19. Like many other SMEs in the country, they face the grim choice of taking some risks in the workplace or going hungry. CGTN's Terry Wangari has that story.
Hairdresser Beauty Matunhira arrives at her client's home in Johannesburg armed with dye, relaxer, ready to tackle her next case of lockdown hair.
There are few who are allowing us to come and do their hair at home. Some they're afraid. Because when getting inside their complex, sometimes we have to sneak, sometimes we have to bribe the securities, sometimes we have to hide inside their cars, clients' cars, so that we'll enter the complex.
Discreet house calls have become routine for Beauty, who found herself out of a job when salons and barbershops were forced to close under South Africa's coronavirus lockdown, which is now in its 11th week.
It's better because we are managing to buy food. Since the money is not enough for paying rent and do everything, sending our parents' money home, but at least we are managing to buy food.
Unable to send money to her parents back home in Zimbabwe, she's also worried about the future. Beauty is risking jail time by visiting clients at home, as hairdressers are still banned from working under the lockdown rules, even as the government has begun to relax restrictions to allow for a partial reopening of the economy.
We actually do sneak in a stylist or anybody I need to fix myself for me. I sneak them in too. But it has been hard because of this COVID-19. It has been hard, really hard.
For barbershops, the situation is also dire.
No work, no income. I'm the breadwinner of my family, and our business is the main source of income. And I mean, it's kind of difficult. I had money, but I didn't know the lockdown is gonna be like extended to another 2-3 months. And I mean, the government don't want us to work. And if we open our shops, it's against the law, it becomes criminalized.
An industry survey in April showed that around 70% of businesses were contemplating closures and job cuts, and up to 21% were already closed.
We have conducted a survey, and people who indicated that they will be able to sustain the lockdown and for a period thereafter to run their businesses successfully once again, that was about 52% as well. And that 52% significantly dropped to 18%. Already businesses closing forever, 20 to 21%.
Last week, the government told the Employers' Organization for Hairdressing, Cosmetology and Beauty that it was drafting guidelines for the reopening of the personal care sector, but did not provide a time frame. It is hoped that these guidelines are released sooner rather than later for the sake of Beauty and Adele. Terry Wangare, CGTN.
And I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In Global Business, we'll be exploring the budgets from 3 East African countries. Lots of much higher deficits on the table, but also some rather curious tax proposals as well. We'll have the details from Dar es Salaam, Kampala, and of course right here in Nairobi at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Still ahead, UNESCO raises the alarm about the threat the coronavirus pandemic poses to museums worldwide.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice. The United Nations cultural body UNESCO now says the ongoing coronavirus pandemic has hit world museums quite hard. The agency says at least 10% may actually never reopen, while others will have to halt new projects. This is attributed to the lockdowns implemented by various governments around the world. Here's CGTN's Mohammed Abubakar with more.
Museums hold some of the treasures of history and the world's heritage. But lockdowns as a result of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic have seen the numbers drop to unimaginable levels. According to the Paris-based International Council of Museums, at least 10% of private and public museums might never reopen. This has left UNESCO concerned.
What I'm sure that if we lose one museum or one cultural center or one theater, it's affecting diversity. What I'm sure that the whole ecosystem that we have right now ensures the diversity.
The institution also says most museums largely depend on tickets sold to tourists and visiting scholars. But with lockdowns implemented by governments, coupled with travel restrictions, things have been tough.
For many reasons. It's not only because they are affecting on financial issues. Some of them have lost the subventions that they received from governments or local states. Some of them have lost the sponsors because sponsors decided to put the money in health and education. And many are faced with the trouble that they didn't receive any income in the last 4 or 5 months.
But in countries such as the Philippines, Indonesia, Montenegro, and Iraq, new projects have been halted. As conflict continues rocking some nations, there are fears that precious historical gems may be lost. One such country is Somalia. Here, UNESCO is working with local authorities to set up new museums and rebuild a destroyed one. Astatal, CGTN.
Your sports news up next. Coming up, International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach says athletes will be consulted on Tokyo 2020 racism protests.